Hello and welcome to Promoting LGBTQ plus inclusivity in your workplace. This is a partnership between West Hartford Pride and the West Hartford Chamber. We are working together to make sure that we create an inclusive community in all facets of life, including in the workplace. Today we have our esteemed panelists, Barry Walters, Adrian Billing-Smith, and Raina Dighton-White, and they're going to be discussing some ways to make sure that you are increasing your workplace success by increasing your talent pool and supporting your employees. Up first, we're going to hear from Barry Walters.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for dropping in, and we hope that you will have some insights from our webinar today. If we could go on to the next slide. Thank you. We'll have our agenda here. You'll see that in just a brief rundown, we'll have our introduction. We'll talk a little bit about promoting LGBTQ plus inclusivity and what does an inclusive workplace look like. We'll have a little bit of discussion and Q&A and some protections in the workplace. Today's presenters are myself, Barry Walters. I am co-chair and founder of the West Hartford Pride organization here in town. I am also, my day job is the Director of External Communications and Policy at AP&H, A Place to Nourish Your Health. Dawn Enos, who could not be here today but has contributed a video, is a West Hartford Pride member. She's a professional professor at UHart and a journalist for various media outlets, as you see there. I will let Adrian and Raina introduce themselves.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Adrian Billing-Smith. I am a West Hartford Pride member by night, I guess all day. But during the day, I am your equity coordinator for the town of West Hartford. I also have another organization that's important too, and a partner with West Hartford Pride Concerned Parents of Color of West Hartford.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Raina Dighton-White. I am an attorney by training and by trade, but I work at University of St. Joseph as a Title IX coordinator and director of diversity and inclusion. I thank you all for having me today. And yes, I am a member of the West Hartford Pride Board.
Thank you, Raina. And thank you, Adrian. We're going to start first with a brief word from Dawn. She'll be talking about inclusivity in your workplace. If you'll go ahead and play.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dawn Ennis, here at my home in West Hartford, where I've lived for 19 years. I'm sorry I can't be with you today, but I've got a medical appointment. So I'm going to record a little video to talk about the work that I do and why it's important to have inclusive workspaces. I'm a journalist, and for the last 9 years, I've been working from here, from my home. I write, I edit, I have been making videos, and I have another job. This is just 5 minutes away. Let me take you there. So welcome to the UHart podcast studio, where I'm the manager, in addition to teaching classes in audio, podcasting, journalism, communications, news literacy, how we all consume the media, and sports journalism. In addition to all of that, I'm raising 3 kids by myself. I'm a transgender woman, and I consider being trans the 5th most interesting thing about me. So at our studio, we're very inclusive. We make sure that everyone has a voice. And that's the whole point of this, giving everyone, all employees, all people, customers, the people we interact with every day, a voice, a way to feel as if you're included. So let me talk a little bit about my experience, and I'll be brief because a lot of people here are alive and they want to talk too. 10 years ago next month, I came out of the closet as a transgender woman, the first one in American television network news. What I didn't expect was that those friends who I wasn't sure about would support me, that my family, who I thought for sure would support me, didn't, and that the paparazzi and the media would make it into a spectacle. Coming out is hard. coming out with the media harsh spotlight like I'm under right now, it's next to impossible. I had a breakdown. I lost my way. It took me it took me exactly a year before I was able to find my way out of that closet again. But ever since, I've been very lucky to have support, to have help. And what I learned is that an LGBTQ friendly workplace, a workplace that is understanding and accepting of all marginalized folks, not just the LGBTQ community, but people of color, Asian and Pacific Islanders, people of Native American history, people with disabilities. The responsibility is to allow everyone to be their true selves, to live authentic lives. That's what I've tried to do here at the university and in my various jobs that I've had since becoming a single mom and widow. I will tell you this, although I had a terrible experience in coming out in network TV news, I had a great experience in working in the LGBTQ media and here in academia. I have found that people want to go that extra mile. They want to share their pronouns. They want to be seen as accepting. And you know what? That's nice, but I don't need allies. To quote my friend Carly Webb, what I need right now are accomplices. And I hope that those of you watching will understand the difference between standing behind me and standing shoulder to shoulder as we fight the hate that is out there. Thank you very much for letting me have a few moments of your time. I'm Dawn Ennis. My social media is @LifeAfterDawn, and I welcome your questions and your connections. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. Even though you're not here, I appreciate your contribution. We're going to shift to some of the meat and potatoes, if you will. How can your business be more inclusive? What is an inclusive workplace? And I'll turn this over to Adrienne, if you want to take it off.
Yep. Thank you, Barry. So when we're talking about businesses being more inclusive, and today we're talking specifically to LGBTQ plus employees, but make sure you're thinking about your entire business. I know some of you are varying sizes. There might only be one or two of you in your business, but still with that, you can go outside of just making your workplace space more inclusive, but making your business inclusive, your customer base more inclusive, letting them know that those are the outlets and connections you're trying to build, and that your business is working to better itself. So some things I'll be talking about today is, what is an inclusive workplace? Do your LGBTQI employees and, like I said, customers feel like they belong in your space? And what can you do as a leader of your business? What is an inclusive workplace? Inclusion can be measured by a sense of belonging, connection, and community at work. It's really about how you feel connected to your workplace and the people around you. An organization that has mastered inclusion and one where people feel encouraged to bring their whole selves to work. Now, I'm going to talk about that bolded word, whole selves to work. When you are a part of a quote unquote marginalized community, it's hard to bring your whole self to work. I've watched a lot of TED Talks on that, what that means, taking that cover off, taking that mask off, because in a lot of places, in a lot of corporate America, you're not able to do that. You're not able because you don't know the dynamics of your workplace. You don't know who supports you or who may not be interested or may actually be actively against who you are as an individual and your identity. So when we talk about bringing your whole self to the workplace, that starts with the culture, the leadership, and that starts with you building out those tenets or those pillars of belonging. And once you start to build out those pillars of belonging, and they call it in the next slide I'll show, it's called activating those pillars, then you can start expecting or hoping that the folks in your workplace, your LGBTQI people of color, people with disabilities are bringing their whole selves to the workplace, and in a comfortable space that you can have those discussions, that people feel like they belong there. The 5 pillars of belonging are to feel welcome, known, included, supported, and connected. When you talk about welcoming your employees, that's talking about that culture that you've created. So when someone who may be a new hire walks in, they immediately feel like they belong there. You can do that through their onboarding experience. You can do that through personalizing things. You can do that through the inclusive language that you use during their onboarding experience, and through activities. I think that since COVID, now that we're coming out of the other side, hopefully, we can get back in those spaces and do group activities together, do workplace-based activities together, and create those spaces of safety and belonging. The next pillar is to feel known. When you're doing that, like I said, you want to encourage those social events. I know sometimes it's hard to do so. Where's that work-life balance? So I think finding that, and finding the interest of your employees is really important. Always make sure that you're inviting folks in, not calling them out or pushing them out. Always inviting them in, and that leads to feeling included. When you want to feel included, you want your employees to feel included, ask what they need, ask their interests, ask their likes, ask and learn more about them, so that they feel like they're part of the process, creating the events, creating policies with you, creating onboarding systems and recognition. And also to feel supported. That's a really deep one. When you feel supported in the workplace, myself being LGBT, part of the LGBTQI community, also being a Black woman, feeling supported in the workplace is really important. It empowers your employees, and it helps them to succeed in their roles. And I think that's really important when you have the support systems there, when you have the tools and resources there. And you have the proper policies, which I'll also talk about that piece of inclusivity in your workplace. And also the last one, feeling connected. You feel connected when you see folks who look like you. You feel connected when you have folks in the workplace who understand, or can empathize with your personal experiences. That helps in any workplace. It's been proven that when you have these 5 pillars and these connections and these feelings of belonging within your workplace, your employees are twice as likely to be more engaged, productive, resilient, satisfied, and committed. And when you're a business and you're looking for your employees, those are the things you want. You want retention. You want the right recruit. You want to hire the right person. You want to retain them. And you have to make sure that you're connecting them. Now that I said that some of you only have maybe smaller businesses, how are you connecting with other businesses that are similar or next door, to make sure that your employee feels like they're a part of the community, whatever that looks like? I know in West Hartford, we have our 3 or 4 business districts. What does that look like during those meetings? How are you talking about these issues? How are you making your employees feel included in that process? And I think that's really important. Also, when you're talking about supported, included, known, connected, and welcome, policies matter. When an employee walks in and they don't know that they're safe in their workspace, that can cause a lot of anxiety. What kind of policies do you have? What kind of, from protective policies, anti-harassment policies, to transition policies for our transgender and non-binary community members and employees, to bathroom policies? How are you setting up the workplace to feel welcoming, so people know that they belong there and they're included and they're supported. Those are important things to look at when you're looking at policies. How are you building your culture to be inclusive? What does that look like? Do you do it through policies? Do you do it through events? You need to take a look at the entire spectrum of a workplace. And I think that that's really important and really the foundation to building an inclusive workplace. And as you as a leader, again, it's those policies, it's how you respond, the trainings that you do. Are you offering trainings to your employees? Are you taking trainings? It doesn't stop with your first 1 hour DEI training. I like to tell people, you build upon that. You continue to make yourself more educated in the areas of DEI. DEI, and especially equity, affects everyone. Your everyday is affected by DEI. It's not a trendy term. It's not 3 words that are trying to cause shame. It's really about your everyday connection to your community and how you can be a helpful and respectful member of that community, and how you can continue to welcome people in your community and support them. And that's all I have today for you.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. That was great. I love hearing you talk. Navigating the workplace, panel discussion with the 3 of us.
Yeah.
So who wants to kick off there?
Hey, you want me to kick it off? I'll kick it off.
Sure, go for it.
You know, when I thought about this piece, all of us were trying to figure out how to put this workshop together, and we thought it was important to give you some of those inclusive workplace tips and also protections, which Raina will go over at the end. But really, we wanted to make sure that you knew the experiences that each of us have gone through as people in the LGBTQI community, as people of color, as people who are just trying to navigate these spaces, as women, 2 of us sitting here right now, and Kate can even attest to that, trying to navigate these spaces and understand some of those things that we have gone through. So when we're talking about that, and I'll pose a question to the group and we can each answer, let's talk about your early experiences in the corporate or nonprofit America and how you walked into that space at an early age, right out of college, maybe even a little before that through interning. How did you navigate those spaces? Did you feel welcome? Did you feel like you actually belonged in those spaces? And talk about your experiences. I'll let Barry start off.
Thank you. My earliest experience, let's see. You know, my first job was in retail with good old Sears, Roebuck and Company in Tucson, Arizona. So I was not out in that environment. It was not a comfortable space to be out in that environment, particularly at a young age, particularly in Tucson, Arizona, and in such a very public place. I was very private and even introverted at that time. I'm not even sure how I faced customers, but I put on a good face, I think. It wasn't until perhaps later when I started not really caring what people thought of me for being gay, that I really just, I pretty much said, this is who I am. And there were times where I had people who were not so communicative with me. I had an issue in one particular store that an individual thought, I don't know, that my gayness and potentially, you know, illnesses that have been historically associated with gay men would rub off on them somehow magically if we were in the same room. And, you know, that was, you know, 20 years ago at this point, and it wasn't exactly, you know, it was at that time in that place, it was the store manager that I worked for who pulled him aside and gave him an earful. But still, it has a negative effect on who you are and how you present yourself. And you tend to stay closed off and not want to engage with your coworkers, and not want to kind of just keep your head down and do what you need to do and then get out. Um, those are probably a couple examples that I faced. And I guess I'll go ahead and throw it over to Raina.
Hi, everyone. So Barry, kind of piggybacking off of what you said, and Adrian, regarding, can you guys hear me? I have a very
Yes.
loud voice and I try not to yell. Okay. Um, so kind of piggybacking off of that, I I was raised by two mothers. So I have gay parents, and my father was also gay. So my parents were married, and I think that just even goes to show the extent to which societal pressure, especially within the Black community, you've got two college-educated young Black people, and it's the 70s, and you better go get married and make some children. Um, but uh, I'm now growing up, and I'm out there in the world. I'll take this even back this far. Um, Within school, I did not let a lot of people know that I had gay parents. I didn't have a lot of sleepovers. Very few people, period, knew that about my family. And I lived walking distance to the high school, right? Um, and I lived and worked in that town as a teenager. And I worked for the same boss from high school through law school. And it was probably when I was in college that I officially told him I have two mothers. And it was only because one had become so ill, I had to step away from like my little side job and go help her. Um, and my mother, the same way. She did not share a lot about her personal life at the job that she had. And it was only when she fell ill during that time period that she was really able to come out about her health status, about her recovery status, and about the true extent to how we existed as a family. Um, and that can be very isolating. Um, you hear a lot of things, and I think this is something that's important while people kind of talk about, very, like you said, folks discussing their concerns, their worries, their values at work, is that whether or not you see that identity immediately with someone, you don't know. And it was constantly insulting to me to hear this comment. People can do what they want to, but they really shouldn't be around children. People can do what they want to, but they really shouldn't raise children. And I'm sitting here like, you chose me, right? Some lesbians created all of this, the responsibility to showing up, the skills, the homework, the transcripts. That was done by two women and a gay guy in Jersey. So, to sit there and be that qualified, to be that coveted, but then to hear that that couldn't have possibly been attributed to how you were raised. And that's hard. That's really hard. But it also, like Barry talked about, it just makes you pull back. As I was listening to you guys discuss, I realized, I truly have an attitude about work that is, if I like what I'm doing in terms of I'm in a job that's actually my passion, what I like, what I've been trained for, that's fine. But I have that very heavily separated from my workplace environment. My workplace environment is a place that I go to provide services for which I get money. And then I take that back to my community and we live as we need to. We live as Black women, we live as queer Black women, we live as queer Black feminists. And there may be bits and pieces about that get to come out now. Now, I'm at a university, we're in a whole new century, there are new laws. But I also hold a place of privilege as someone who investigates workplace discrimination complaints, right? So are people really treating me like they're treating other folks? I think if you're in a small organization, especially, you really want to think about what kind of experience are you giving people? Are you giving people an experience where they can say, you know what? I need to take FMLA because of this. You know what? I had a great time. And this was the birthday party. This is the true extent of the family. And my stepmother's parents are coming in, and what that looks like. We're having to say, you being able to talk about my mother's. When you can't discuss your family, there is so much about you that naturally pulls back. And as a result, you don't buy in. I very much have bought into my training and education and what it is that I want to do. But even at job interviews, I tell people, I understand if I'm not the right fit for you, but understand that I'm always going to be doing this work somewhere, someplace, likely within the greater Hartford area. So, you guys make the decision you need to, but I'll see you around. And it comes from that attitude of, I do this. It's just a question of whether or not I'm in an environment comfortable enough to do it. As a result, I've also never held any position longer than 7 years. I move around. I work, I get the experience I need, and then it's time to go. And that can be difficult for some folks, but it comes from just constantly wearing a mask,
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you both for that. And I'll talk a little bit about my experience, but I just want to, hold space for you guys because that's really important to hear. Those are two completely different experiences and still that same common denominator of holding back who you are. And when we're talking about building inclusive workplaces and being a part of an inclusive workplace, you don't want your employees to hold back because if they're holding back in that realm, in pulling back, then they can't navigate or work properly. And yeah, you might be great at your job, but there are things that they're missing out on and some other talents that you may have. And you're missing out on things and relationships that you could develop. Like you say, Raina, moving on in 7 years, finding, I got everything I needed. I have to go now. You don't know if that's attributed to always having to pull back in the beginning, not talking about your family in the beginning. And I'll go back even further in work. I played college basketball, which everyone knows. And I was actually out before I went to college. And this is late 90s, early 2000s. So it still wasn't cool to necessarily be out, right? So I was a part of a team. That's all I'd ever known for the last whatever amount of years of my life. And going to college, you think it's going to be better. Like, okay, everyone's out and everyone's open and this is going to be a great situation. But I didn't have that on a Division I basketball team. I was a freshman who had to endure like workplace, like not harassment per se, but those same things Barry's talking about, as if I was in the locker room and I was going to look at people or turn somebody gay. And I was like, I don't have any time to go to practice and go to school at the same time, let alone trying to turn anyone anything, right? So you do hold back. It caused, and I'll be open about who I am. It caused me to become depressed. It caused me to pull back from my environment. It caused angst in the way that I played. And not until I was an adult did I recognize those things. I was freshman of the year. But as I continued to go through my college career and go into my sophomore, there is a sophomore slump, and I did have that also. But those traumas and those experiences hindered my play, hindered how I developed relationships with my own teammates. So that same concept, that's my first job, right? I am going out there. I have been recruited and brought into a program to produce. But when you get into environments where there's not inclusive, and again, that leadership makes a difference, right? If you have in sports in general, you wouldn't think it, but sports in general are very homophobic, very transphobic. And when that leadership can't support you in ways that you need to be supported as a young adult, you do pull back, and it causes a lot of trauma and it causes a lot of damage that you have to figure out. And when you're navigating those spaces and thinking, I'm here, I need to produce, it puts so much weight on you on top of being a student athlete. So yeah, I can speak about that now and what it did to me, because I could have gone to another program, and trust me, those ended up being the best years of my life, But thinking back now as an adult and going to another program where there might have been the support systems, or another time, right now we're in the not late 2000s, but 10 years, 20 years, and seeing programs who are promoting LGBTQI student athletes, talking about pride, putting those athletes in place, watching the WNBA and the NBA and baseball, even sometimes, even if it's just for money and likes, putting that out there and feeling like you're a part of something and not excluded is really important to the success of folks and their future and how they navigate their spaces when they do become adults and professionals. When I got out of college, I was like, okay, I wasn't in the closet to start off with, but I even pulled back and was more closeted in college when I didn't need to be. Because I had no issue going into college as a young person. But, when I became a flight attendant before an attorney, I loved it. And they talked about spaces where LGBTQI people and people of color are most likely to go are uniform spaces. Because when you're in a uniform space, then nobody can identify who you are, right? And I'd never recognized that for a long time until I got into this work of, I went from a basketball uniform to a flight attendant uniform. And then when I got done with law school and passed the bar, what did that look like? Who was I? What was my identity? So there were a lot of things that I had to figure out for myself when I went into that professional space of being an attorney. So I totally get that. Talk about, one more thing. We have a few minutes before we move on to Raina's piece. Talk about raising children and what you have, your expectations or hopes for them as they navigate coming from an LGBTQI community and family. What are your hopes for them and them being a part of these workplaces and their identity?
Raina, you want to go first or shall I?
That's fine. Yeah. So I think one of the things that we have to remember is people are very protective of their parents. Who doesn't love their mother, right? I think it's easy sometimes to hear things about yourself and go whatever, but it's very difficult to hear that your primary socialization group is not right, that they can't do a good job. And I'll say this much: for me, it created a horrific sense of insecurity because what it essentially conveyed to me was, we should really be able to take you away from your parents. I mean, to exist in that constant state. And bear in mind, I was growing up during the 90s. This was before there were those very strong protections in place. I mean, Connecticut was still liberal and my mother was well connected, but there was still this idea of, oh my gosh, you for nothing else other than what they do in a bedroom. And children only really know that their parents' sexuality is an issue once we enter out into the rest of the world. Their parents, they just want us to turn off the lights, stop taking long showers, right? Maybe not grow so fast in terms of clothing. I had parents that were gay, and that was a problem for the rest of the world. It wasn't a problem in our household. It wasn't an issue in our household. If anything, I had two moms, and I want you all to think about what that's like, because they were there at the same time, just momming it up. It was a lot of attention. And they both had great strengths, but to grow up in a situation where you have this wonderful, loving family, and to always have to step back outside into the world and keep that a huge secret. You're right, Adrian. It makes you very split. There's this very split self. And that continued when I got to college. And really by law school, people were a lot more open about that, but it was still done in a defensive way. And I had to walk away from so many things. The most memorable one, in addition to job interviews and people and out of classrooms even, was I was on a date, and this guy, and we're sitting down eating. We had ordered the appetizers, and I went to school in the DC area. So we're in Georgetown, and parking is crazy. And, a gay couple walked past us. It's a male couple. And I was like, oh, they look nice. And it's like, I don't have any problem against gay people, but they should not be allowed to raise children. I mean, I'd heard that so many times. I had to get up and go. I mean, if we want to talk about that from a business standpoint, I got up, put $20 down on the table, went to the waiter, explained it. And the waiter just shook his head at me and said, I understand. I said, I'm sorry that I ordered a meal and I'm walking out, but this is what just happened to me. And went down the street and went to the movies by myself. But that's just what it's like. So when you talk about raising children, when you talk about growing up, understand that the environment that you create really sets the tone for how other employees behave. It sets the tone for how much of who you are does get to come to the workplace. And if you're thinking about holding back, if you're thinking about what you say, your mind then isn't fully on the job. It can't be. It's preoccupied with trying to present a certain image for financial well-being. So Adrienne, I mirror that around the idea of just, you learn very early on, people might not be okay with this, but you need to move this way. But in my personal life, it made me highly defensive. And I had to kind of learn, as time went on, how to deal with that in a different way. But young me, just wasn't having it elsewhere. I felt like I have to do this for work. So the minute I got out of there, it was just like busting loose.
Yeah, I totally understand that and agree that, it's a split life. And that's why when we're talking about businesses, that's why I wanted to have this personal experience from each of us, is that when, like you said, when your employees are living a split life, they can't be fully engaged in their work. And that's not good for your bottom line. That's not good for employee retention. And when we are creating these spaces, these workspaces, to be inclusive, we need to really be thinking about that. And that's why I just touched on inclusive language and what that looks like. You constantly, as a leader, you're learning, you're always learning, right? You want your company to be better. You want your business to be better. You want those things to be better because you want more money, rightfully so. But you also have to, that includes inclusive language. You should want to be better for your employees and the people you're bringing in. You should always want to continue to train and educate yourself on what your workspace place could look like, because you don't know who could walk in your door, and those biases that you may hold and don't even know sometimes will turn that prospective employee off. And they have to walk off, and you've missed out on a great chance to expand your business. So I think that constant training matters. And when you talk about those experiences that you had, as an adult and as a child, and Barry will talk about raising a child and his hopes for his child, because his child is in the workplace right now in that space, and what his hopes are for his child. I think it's important that we continue to have discussions like this about the workplace and our expectations as a community. So I'll pass it along to you, Barry.
Thanks, Adrienne. Actually, I'll start this with 17 plus years ago, when I and my partner learned that we had been chosen by a birth mother to take on the responsibility of raising a family with a newborn. And, this was a good experience actually with my employer at the time, who had me fill out the FMLA paperwork before we even knew for sure that we were going to have to travel a short distance to pick up our soon-to-be son. So they were very cooperative and very welcoming and open and ready for me to be a parent, even if I wasn't. Sure I was, they were, and they really sped the process along. Now, he's now 17. He is in the workplace, and luckily for him, I think he's in a good spot because nobody seems to really be holding against him for who he is. And, you know, my son doesn't really hide that very well. He's very open about who he is. He's, I would say, non-conforming as far as what labels are out there. His issues come more from school and from a few others in school or that he interacts with that are not as kind to him for having two dads. They like to call him names and such, even though they don't even know him personally. They do take it out on him, and that does affect how he behaves at home, in public. It affects how he behaves at work, I think. Even though he has no issues with anybody there, you carry that with you, as we've all talked about. You take this barrier, you build, the walls, and try to keep the negativity out. And for him, he's 17, and we know that 17-year-olds aren't always the best at keeping negativity away. They sometimes seem to even invite it. But he does his best to fight off, not physically, but to fight off that negativity that he's often surrounded with. The school does the best that it can, but they can't stay on top of every student every single minute of the day, so things get said and done. And then once they leave that school, it can be a free-for-all. So again, it just falls back on what you bring with you when you walk in the door. My son at 17 years old has already learned to not talk about certain things, to keep things very private about who he is. And despite the fact that we have always taught him to be, to hold as much confidence in who he is as possible, it's taken a major hit as he's gotten older and is trying to live his authentic self, and is allowed to in certain spaces, and in others he's not at all. So it's very much a struggle, and it's actually hurtful to a parent. And I imagine that, being a gay dad has nothing to do with it. I think it's a parent thing, to watch somebody have to deal with things that are not something that they own necessarily.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I agree. And like you said, you carry it into the workplace. And when you're building an inclusive workplace, that has to, transfer over to your home and how you live your life. That's the only way to truly and genuinely build those workplaces, is to make sure you're living it in your everyday life. Thank you both for that. I know that we have about 15 more minutes for our presentation, so I want to go on to now some of the protections for LGBTQI folks, and how our business leaders and employees can again get more education on how to be more involved, or how to build a more inclusive workplace. And I will pass it on to Raina.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I am going to discuss what our protections look like at a federal and state level, as well as just things to consider. Before I do that, very quickly, one of the things to remember, especially when you are dealing with children, be you the parent of the person who may have done the poor behavior, or the parent who's trying to support the student, we can't change schools like you can change jobs. You're kind of stuck where you are in terms of that district. So think about that in terms of that student and their experience, and what kind of employee that produces down the line. All right, so very quickly, Most of you who are in business, you know, you've got the state of Connecticut regulations, you've got the federal regulations, and I like to divide them up to just make it easier for folks. If anybody has ever wondered what that means, federal means everyone, everywhere. If you have a business in Massachusetts, if you're working with some folks out in Indiana and you're still here in Connecticut, federal means that's going to apply everywhere. At our state level, you do typically have to look at not where you have your business incorporated, but where it is physically located. So again, your incorporation in Delaware has nothing to do with your compliance in New Jersey, all right? So our federal protections, really, we look at the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. This is a regulatory entity, the same as OSHA, DPH, right? These are folks who can come into the workplace and say, you're not following our rules. When we look at the private sector, we're talking about places that have more than 15 employees. Okay, if you're a small business, there are other considerations. You see that I also have the Department of Justice listed and that there's a dot next to that. The Department of Justice can actually show up and yes, investigate you for Title VII, which are all of our civil rights violations, race, gender, religion, all of those pieces, if you hold a federal contract. And I know for small businesses, federal contracts are a big deal, right? There's a lot of money in that. You look good. Remember that once you fall under that, you also fall under the auspices of not only the EEOC, but the Department of Justice. And I got to tell you something, you don't want the Department of Justice. It's not all FBI and DEA and those folks. You have entire civil rights litigation units, and this is what they do all day, every day. We're trying to run businesses, right? We're busy. No, all these people have to do is investigate. They got a caseload, they got a lot of money, and they have a whole team. Typically, we don't have that type of team to answer back, right? So the same way we don't get into it with DPH, we really don't get into it with OSHA. We want to look at this not as a, oh gosh, this is something I have to do and maybe it'll work out. We want to look at this the same way we would any other regulatory entity that affects our bottom line and affects our reputation. When I have executive orders listed here, I'll go into that a little bit more, but this is what you want to remember about executive orders. We've had two very different administrations in the last couple of years. We've had the Trump administration, we've had the Biden administration. You saw both of them issue executive orders. The way that executive orders get teeth is that they are generally picked up by agencies. We might be announcing them to the public in the world, but really that's the president at the time, their way of saying, hi, Department of Labor, hi, EEOC, hi, DOJ, here are things that I'm really going to promote. And you'll start to see those agencies acting accordingly. So while a president may not be able to change laws across the board, we want to pay attention to our executive orders. Our last place and our last area of protection is the Second Federal Circuit Court District. And this really matters because this is where people come to sue. And federal cases are expensive to defend. In most cases, if you have liability insurance, you are likely having at this point to call up that insurance company to get protection around whatever it is that's come forward. Federal attorneys are also expensive to retain. So when we look at our federal laws, when we look at our federal regulations, if you begin to track this, note when you see a federal decision in New York, note when you see a federal decision around labor and employment in Vermont, that's binding to Connecticut, okay? So those are all the different places where you might find laws popping up at you. At the state level, it really is the CHRO, the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities. This is recorded, but there is a link there, 46A60. That is our Connecticut General Statute. And if you were to Google CHRO 46A-60, you'd see that pop up. It really describes what our discriminatory employment practices are in the state of Connecticut that are prohibited. Our next place is the state of Connecticut Superior Court. Why? Oh no, that's okay, you can move on. Because that's also where people come to sue. All right, I might not have a federal claim. You might be a really small employer. However, we have laws that protect against family status. We have laws that protect against gender identity. We have laws that specifically protect against LGB before we even get to that T. So understand that this isn't just about transgender rights. This isn't about parenting and pregnancy rights. Across the board, once you start to walk into the territory of saying, I'm not doing this because, or you're using any part of that to justify your employment decisions, you start walking yourself into court. Yeah, and the expression that I use for all of this is, and I even say this to organizations whom I support and advise, don't engage in this behavior. You might as well set your money on fire. At least you'd have gotten heat from it. So let's move on. There are some resources and tips I want you all to understand. Yes, I just named all of these entities, but the same places that enforce also assist. As an attorney, I can tell you, we typically don't like popping out at you guys and going, hi, surprise, you did wrong. We want you all to know these things, but we're lawyers, so we're not always the best at communicating. And we sometimes hide information in places that seem very obvious to us, but not to the public. One, I want people to know that if you've ever looked at the EEOC website and you were completely intimidated, that's okay. Even I don't try to go through that thing at its homepage and then mill around. I really will Google EEOC education. I like .gov websites, and that is because those are the regulatory entities. When I teach this in other trainings or to students, I say, if it ain't .gov, don't give it no love. And what we want to look at, well, because, if you've got, like governmentcompliance.com, you can just go to the government and they'll tell you. So the EEOC has a training institute. And as you see here, Wednesday, May 10th, they're doing Pride in the Workplace. The fees tend to be very low, usually about $145 per person, or maybe about $200 per person. So as the head of your organization, if you have an HR person at this point, if you've grown to that extent, these are very affordable matters. They're very affordable. And in the event that you have the EEOC showing up, it is helpful to say, yes, we tried, okay? Yes, we tried to comply. And that brings me to my next slide. The FDIC actually has a series of slides. And that's why I say go to .gov, right? Specifically for federal contractors. This is a great example of, again, why you want to look to your federal and state government as well as professional industries for your training and education. It doesn't have to be a $20,000, $15,000, even $5,000 endeavor. And that's part of why these entities can have such a heavy hand around their enforcement. From their standpoint, they've put you on notice and you never bother to avail yourself to that. Okay. Can we move to the next slide? The EEOC will pursue punitive damages, okay? If you all don't know what punitive damages are, they are meant to punish. We have compensatory damages. That's the person's salary. And again, if you're a small business, but maybe you've got 20 or 25 employees, you're still going to fall under the EEOC. And the money that you were paying an individual in the event that the EEOC, they find an issue, their salary might be 40, 50, 60, 70,000, right? And maybe you pay that out. It's 2 years, 140. The punitive damages are meant to deter you from this. They're meant to make it so expensive for the punishment that you take that same money and invest it back. So where you do not have anti-harassment programs in place, where it looks like you truly did not try to set that tone, that culture of compliance, you will see them coming in. And you can even, again, Google EEOC punitive damages. And they pursue them, not often, but when they do, it becomes very public. Next slide, please. Try to comply, right? It doesn't mean that you're always going to be successful, but one of the most important things when we talk about creating that environment of compliance is that you do show the reasonable attempts. And that's how the EEOC and other entities will come after you around punitive damages. But they typically will stick back to guidance and really giving you, hey, we're going to put the employee that was wrong in a better place, but they'll work with you. Once it looks like we have, I don't really care, and a pattern or practice, the EEOC will dig. They could have one complaint, but they will start to look at your practices around whatever matter that is, hiring, gender identity, and they will go back. That can be a long time and a lot of money. Offer regular trainings on protected classes and fold it into the CHRO sexual harassment requirement. I really recommend this. You already have to do the sexual harassment requirement training. Put these pieces on there. Make it clear what protected classes are. Make it clear what gender identity is, and make it clear that if you are engaging in really poor behavior around gender identity, around orientation, you're easily walking yourself into sexual harassment. Yeah. Use government and industry standard organizations. And the thing I really want folks to understand in terms of signing yourself up for these entities around newsletters is that if you're missing updates around LGBTQ workplace protections, you're likely not getting the other employment updates anyway, right? So that culture of compliance will build itself over. If you're allowing that nasty environment, you are going to find yourself not just at odds with LGBTQ workplace discrimination issues, but in other areas as well. Next slide, because we're right at 11 and we'll wrap it up. Thank an employee who brings a concern. They could have brought it elsewhere. They could have gone on TikTok. They could have gone on Instagram, right? They could have walked right into that entity and said, I'm concerned, I'm worried. So when someone comes and lets you know something about what it is that's being done, thank them for discussing something with you. Allegations are oftentimes hard to prove. That doesn't change the negative experience of the employee. We live in a very small area in terms of our population. Those of you who might be in niche industries see what it's like to try to recruit. You don't want that negative reputation, okay? And again, regular training will avoid responsive training. It can help maintain the dignity of LGBTQI persons. Why? We all see what it's like when there's an incident, especially in that small workplace environment. And then you have, right, the cultural sensitivity training, right? And it follows that incident. Well, if we're regularly training anyway, one, you've set the tone for your employees. And that doesn't mean it has to be every day, every week, but that you make it very clear. Here are resources. Here's what I expect. And we are absolutely going to sit down and have to learn about this. You're not then punishing your staff because somebody complained. And as I oftentimes explain to people, sometimes when I'm counseling through matters like this, I go, I understand what happened. We all get comfortable at work. We need to be, but this was never part of your job description, right? Creating a hostile environment is not in anyone's job description, right? So once we start doing things like that, we're really coming outside of the purpose for why I'm giving you money for this.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you, Barry, and thank you, Kate, and the Chamber for having us today. We'd love to hear any questions or comments that folks may have that are out there. And you can always reach us here at info@westhartfordpride.org if you have any questions or would like us to come in and talk to your employees about, their experiences as LGBTQI folk in the workplace and what that looks like, and do this sort of training with them as well. So if you have any questions, Kate, let us know if there are any questions in the
So far, the only question that we did get was about making sure that the recording would be accessible so that they can share it with other people in their circles, which I think is a fantastic idea. It will be up later today on the Chamber's YouTube channel, but I will send that link out to our attendees, our registered attendees, and then it'll be accessible through other distribution channels once that's up. So I appreciate that people are learned enough and think that this was so informative and so amazing that they want to share it with others. I think that our panelists it was very personal and educational at the same time. It's a hard balance to strike. So thank you for bringing your own stories, but also some hard facts and some real actionable items for us to take into consideration moving forward.
Thank you, Kate. Barry, Raina, any last comments you would like to, send out into our community?
I would say just allow people to be their authentic selves, and when we do that, you'll see things blooming that you didn't think were possible or there.
Yeah, do your best to create that inclusive environment, and remember that compliance is the bottom line. We want to raise that bar. The bare minimum, nobody wants, 70% of anything. So if you're hitting a C, nah, raise the bar, create that comfortable workplace environment.
Absolutely. And I echo both of you. And I am so happy to be on a board who is educated and has the real world experience in this. And hopefully we can continue to put this out into our own community and continue to help West Hartford businesses grow and become more inclusive. So thank you again to Kate and the Chamber. And that concludes our presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you all.